we offer one observation. That is useless and as such doesn't threaten neighboring countries. That's for two reasons. First, other methods. Bowden 17 of The Atlantic finds that North Korea has access to heavy artillery that can kill millions of South Koreans regardless of an anti-missile system. Second, North Korea already has weapons that can get around it. A 2017 article from the Washington Times explains that North Korea has been watching THAAD and has already figured out two ways of beating it. First, it has practiced launching multiple missiles to overwhelm THAAD, and second, North Korea has practiced launching missiles from submarines to avoid THAAD's radar. At that point, impacts about how governments think THAAD is effective are completely irrelevant. Contention one is a sense of safety. Even if countries know THAAD doesn't work, people don't. Lockheed Martin's tests and commercials say that THAAD has a 100% success rate. Even if this isn't true, that makes South Koreans feel safe. That's why 80% of South Koreans now support THAAD, according to an Arirang article from 2 weeks ago. Making South Koreans feel safe is really important. Poikulan 04 of BMC Public Health finds that especially for youths, a fear of an imminent nuclear attack increases the chance of mental disorders and anxiety twofold. Contention two is political poison. Mr. Moon, the newly elected liberal president of South Korea, is walking a tenuous path in the status quo. Kim 17 of Reuters explains that Mr. Moon's party controls only 40% of seats in the nation's parliament, continuing that most proposals require a 60% majority in order to become law. That's why Griffith 17 of CNN explains that Moon was forced to build a coalition of centrist and right-wing parties in order to pass legislation. If Moon terminated THAAD's deployment now, that would destroy Moon's coalition. That's because Moon's ratings would tank. 3 weeks ago, when North Korea tested a hydrogen bomb, South Korean public opinion swung strongly in favor of THAAD missile defense. Thus, as we said earlier, a 27 Arirang article reports that in the last 3 months, support for THAAD has grown from 50% up to over 80% today. If Moon were to remove THAAD right now, his approval ratings would plummet. This is problematic because Kim 17 of Australian National University explains that Moon's coalition is held together by the strength of his unprecedentedly high approval ratings. Other politicians want to work with Moon because they want to piggyback on his popularity. But if he looks like a falling star, they try to disassociate with him so they don't fall too. After removal of THAAD, Moon would not have a workable coalition and would not be able to pass any policy. Look to Kim of Reuters, who finds the previous president, Park, couldn't gather a coalition in parliament and thus couldn't pass any of her major bills. Terminating THAAD deployment puts Moon in the same position, unable to hold his coalition together and thus unable to pass policies. This is very bad, because Moon's policies are excellent. First, the stimulus package. Jung 17 of CNBC explains that Moon plans to enact a $10 billion stimulus package, which would be used to hire new firefighters, policemen, and government employees, estimated to directly increase employment by 810,000 public sector jobs. Reuters in 2017 specifically states that removing THAAD deployment drives a wedge between Moon and the conservatives he needs to pass his jobs plan. Second, solving air pollution. Yonhap 2017 explains that Seoul has the third worst air quality in the entire world. Reuters 2017 explains that Seoul has 10 coal plants that are extremely old and have been emitting particulate matter directly into the urban environment. Stellar 13 of Yale then finds that Seoul's deteriorating air quality kills about 200,000 people each decade. Fortunately, Reuters 17 explains that Moon has already announced temporary shutdowns of those 10 power plants and plans to invest in renewables in order to completely shut them down permanently by 2022. Thus, Anika and I are extremely proud to have been. You ready for cross? Never mind. Thank you, sir. 320. Yep.
Has Moon had issue in the past with his past stimulus packages?
Getting these packages passed and passed?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, exactly. In August, when he halted THAAD deployment, he got his fiscal stimulus package passed. So why does he need the 60%? He can already do that during halting the deployment of THAAD.
So here's a couple of reasons why. One is that we tell you that the shift towards really wanting THAAD in South Korea is really, really new. It's a response to the North Korean hydrogen bomb test as of 2 weeks ago. But second, we're going to tell you that even if he flip-flopped a little bit back then, it was only a temporary halt, and he said it was due to environmental concerns. It didn't actually undeploy THAAD, so it didn't trigger the full impact.
But it was a
because he
halt
never,
regardless, right?
Sure, but he never did it.
And he was able to get the stimulus package passed and get the 60%.
I'm telling you two things. One, he didn't actually carry through with it, which is why it didn't trigger the full impact. And two is that South Koreans just weren't as invested.
So then why is he going to carry
through
your stimulus package but not the one that he actually got approved? in
I
August.
just gave you two reasons why.
Wait,
one
no,
is
you just
because
told me that
80% now don't want THAAD, which is why it's so much bigger now and why Parliament
It was the
isn't willing to
same
go
thing
against
back
that
then.
majority.
What you just told
No,
me
it
was
wasn't.
that
It
the
was
stimulus package that was
50%.
passed in August, he didn't follow through on. Why would he follow through on the one that you're
That's
telling us
not
about?
true.
You
What
just
I'm telling
told me
you is that he didn't follow through on the halt of THAAD back in August, which is why you didn't see these huge impacts, because he never actually took it away. He just said he was examining the environmental impacts. But second, back in August, only 50% of the population supported it, so Parliament was like, okay, we can still go along with him. But now 80% of the population wants THAAD there really badly, because now they're terrified. Can I ask you a question?
Yep.
Awesome. So you tell me that the risk of miscalculation is really high, right?
Yep.
So who attacks?
It's either South Korea or North Korea.
So let's examine that really quickly. South Korea is going to attack first.
No,
Is
it's
your-
mostly North Korea. North Korea is going to
North Korea is gonna
because what
attack
happens
first. Awesome.
is that when they're provoked, then what happens is like they need to show their strength in order to deter the U.S. and then two, they need to circumvent that.
Awesome.
That brings me to my next
Dude,
question.
go for it.
First, in your first overview, tell us that like in the past, North Korea has developed missile technology to circumvent that, right?
Yes, right now it has
So
to.
why, if we implement more missile defense, won't they do the same thing?
We tell you it's completely ineffective. We agree. We're not saying it's good.
So they're gonna circumvent it even more, invest in new technologies, which just like concedes our case.
No. So a couple of problems here. First off, Anika's going to address your case in the rebuttal. Second off, we tell you at the top that that is completely irrelevant, and North Korea knows it's irrelevant, which is why the only impacts in today's round you
That's
should be
not asking my
evaluating
question,
are
right?
political impacts.
Because what
But
you tell us
thirdly-
is in the past, they've developed technologies to circumvent missile defense. If we put
Yes.
more missile defense on the border in your world, what you tell me is that they're just gonna circumvent it even more.
Yes,
The
so
impact
it's
of that
still
is more
useless.
miscalculation according to Goldman, and therefore
No.
an increased chance of war.
Here's the problem with that. North Korea recognizes that it's useless. Our card tells you, the Washington Times tells you, that North Korea has seen the flaws in THAAD and doesn't think it's a threat. But can I ask you a question really quickly about the card I called Edizoni? Is it specific to North Korea?
Yes.
The
That's
answer is no. It tells you missile defense in general. We tell you North Korea knows that is ineffective.
Is it okay if I see some evidence?
Yeah.
Can I see the CM17 evidence that coalition is based on approval?
Okay.
And then in your first warrant stimulus, the Jung evidence, and then the Reuters evidence will that.
I'm sorry, so Jung, it's the one about political, the coalitions. And then the third one was Reuters saying, about Jung. You can get Reuters for you in a second. These are the other two.
Thank you. Pardon? for 30 sake, I'm going to be starting with Michigan, which you can throw in our case, and I'll go theirs. Judges ready?
Yep.
Let's begin. The most important issue in this round is preventing the outbreak of conflict on the Korean Peninsula. The Atlantic reports that any conflict would result in 1 million lives lost and $1 trillion in economic damage. My opponent's impacts talk about preventing mental health issues and stimulating the economy and decreasing pollution. That's all well and good. Those issues are important. However, a war would mean the worst of all of those worlds. Think about the mental health in a war, think about pollution in a war, and think about the economy in a war. A war would devastate all these things and much more. Preventing a war is the biggest impact. It's far bigger than my opponent's, and we say this happens by not deploying missile defense systems. Mazarov says that North Korea wants nuclear weapons as a deterrent for peace, not war. That's really important because, as Sayoni explains, that missile defense, what it does is it nullifies the effectiveness of nuclear weapons because now his deterrent breaks down. As a result, he's forced to increase his own threat to look like he's still a potent threat and look like he still has a deterrent. Go to my opponent's case. Their observation talks about how THAAD has no use, missile defense has no use, and North Korea and thus poses no threat. Their first argument is that North Korea can use artillery. That's not really responsive, because what North Korea really cares about are nuclear weapons, because they've seen that countries like Iraq and Libya become invaded by the US because they don't have nuclear weapons. Yet, they have seen that no country in history that has nukes is ever invaded. It's very simple, right? Because if you invade a country that has nuclear weapons, they'll fire them all at you. That's why he sees it as such a potent deterrent. Artillery simply does not make up for that. Second, they claim that now Kim has developed new weapon systems that can beat it. We also agree with this, right? Kim is developing new, more advanced systems. The problem is the chain reaction. Developing these systems has already spurred South Korea to remilitarize. That causes an arms race, because both sides militarize on both sides. South Korea builds more advanced missiles and more advanced missile defense, so in turn, North Korea must accelerate their own deployment. That is, by definition, an arms race where both sides have to increase their militarization. The reason why that's so bad comes from Golan, who explains that when both sides are armed to the teeth, when both sides fear the other one to an existential level, both sides fear that any one provocation by the other side demands a necessary counterforce, the chance of war spikes. If both sides are afraid of each other, the chance of war goes up exponentially. Go to their first intention, which discusses the idea of safety and mental health. Their first argument here is that people in South Korea don't understand the nuances of missile defense or the North Korean threat. They just think it's okay. Sure, that's all well and good, but politicians in South Korea, the military officials, understand that the North Koreans present a real threat. In fact, the South Korean foreign minister has already admitted that there are flaws with missile defense. That's why South Korea is gunning up. That's a really big issue, because Reuters explains that South Korea is currently asking the US to redeploy tactical nuclear weapons, they're building more ballistic missile defenses, and they're asking for submarine-launched ballistic missiles. That's really important, because it means that it's drawing us closer to war. Even if the people in South Korea feel safer, I would bet that if you're South Korean and you watch the news and you see that your country, who has been peaceful for 60 years, is now putting in more missiles, I would be kind of worried. Go to their impact, though. Their impact is on helping mental health. This is an important issue, but they never solve for it. They read a theoretical card saying that when people feel safer, we'll see a decrease in mental health. Make them come up here and show you this is actually materialized. Missile defense has been here for a long time. Go to their second contention on this idea of political capital. This is kind of a silly argument for a couple reasons. First, because you can turn the argument. Mount explained that Moon's liberal base hates missile defense systems. Moon himself was opposed to it before he got into office. So maybe he wins support from the right, but he loses all the support from the left. That's really important because it means that if you want political capital, he should probably side with his own party and not with another party. But second, this also doesn't make sense if you look at it in context of the US, right? If, like, Trump wants the wall and Democrats want to get rid of Confederate statues. But if Trump agrees to get rid of Confederate statues, that doesn't equal him getting the wall. These are apples and orange comparisons. They can't win that THAAD will give Moon all the capital he needs to pass all his policies. There simply are no link cards here. But let's go to their links. Their firstly discuss the stimulus. This is totally outdated. Their cards are from March, but in July 22nd, Reuters reports that South Korea passed this bill. That date is really important because that was 8 days before missile defense was renewed. During that period, missile defense was suspended, which delinks their entire contention because it means that we can pass policy without missile defense. Go to their second link on pollution. This has no impact. They claim that pollution might go down, make them show you that it would actually happen. If there is efficacy for this, make them show that it's happened in the real world. Their impacts here are all theoretical. That's why you should negate.
take out their entire case. What he concedes in first cross-checks is that the war that they're talking about is a war where North Korea or South Korea attacks. However, war is never going to happen on the Korean Peninsula for 7 reasons. First, the perpetuity of that war is way overblown. Dale 17 of the Washington Bureau explains that the media has exaggerated threats of war, which almost never will occur. But second of all, trust the experts, not the media. Dale continues that the consensus of experts is that North Korea has been making these kinds of threats for years, but will never attack. But third, that's because if North Korea started a war, their nation would literally cease to exist. Detailed 17 explains that Kim Jong-un's ultimate goal is to stay in power and to survive. Starting a war would literally be destabilizing his own regime. But fourth of all, North Korean deterrence has been effective. They don't need to attack to feel safe. King 17 of the UFC explains that Kim Jong-un is doing missile tests to deter U.S. action, and it's working. No attack is needed. But fifth, current diplomacy prevents miscalculation. Frederick 17 of the New York Post reports that the U.S. and North Korea have a line of communication. They could do this if they were worried about a potential attack. But sixth, trust history. The U.S. and North Korea have hated each other for 7 decades and never internationally or unintentionally attacked each other. In fact, Park Korean Institute reports that in 1994, the situation was far more tense, but no attacks ensued. And 7, their actions are inconsistent with the high chance of war. If you believe them in the fictional scenario that you would have to have a war, you'd have to contact all your friends on the West Coast and tell them to evacuate. Their impact makes their link untrue. At that point, you're going to be preferring domestic impacts because we have at least a risk of having some benefit to South Korean interests at the point where war is literally so improbable. That being said, go down their first contention. The first thing they tell you is that the only warrant into why North Korea is going to be more aggressive and go to war is because their nuclear deterrent goes away. However, recognize they even concede to you that missile defense systems don't work and they don't intercept the majority of nuclear missiles. That's really critical because 1, North Korea can still attack with artillery weapons, but 2, most of their missiles are going to be intercepted. At that point, missile defense really isn't that beneficial. North Korea's nuclear deterrent isn't lost. But at that point, mutual assured destruction still exists. But then, let's move on to the 2 ways that they say that North Korea is going to lash out. First, they tell you that they're going to act out by increasing missile tests. We have 2 responses. First of all, they've been doing this for so long, they're not going to stop because North Korea's linchpin of the regime is looking like they're strong, and thus launching more nuclear missiles is going to happen in either world. But second of all, we've had so many nuclear missiles for so long, and we haven't even gotten close to miscalculation. This really doesn't link into their impact. But second of all, they tell you that we're going to level the playing field because now other countries are going to start creating, South Korea is going to start militarizing. First of all, recognize it doesn't matter if they start creating missiles to get around that or other anti-missile systems because they already have, like as Pastor explains, that they already have artillery weapons that can go against the majority of missile defense systems. It really doesn't matter. But second of all, they tell you that this is going to lead to South Korea developing more weapons. But we have a couple of problems with this. First of all, China's Sea presence is already doing this. A 2017 Voice of America article explains that an arms race is already occurring in East Asia due to China's aggression and the expansion in South China Sea. Their impact is not unique. At that point, there's really no link to a miscalculation South Korea is already building up. But then they tell you that North Korea is going to build up weapons. Recognize North Korea is not going to be able to build up more weapons for 3 reasons. First of all, because they're bankrupt. Staff of Reuters explains that North Korea is currently spending about 1/3 of its income on its military and doesn't have any more money to spend. But second of all, because South Korea already spends more. Still, while 70 minutes Business Insider finds that South Korea spends up to 5 times as much on non-defense as North Korea, this arms race would already have started. But third, North Korea nuclearizes anyway. Only the reason the regime is still alive is because of their nuclear deterrent. They can't go away without stopping to build up weapons. At that point, the only impact they have left is from this arms race. It's really not infinitesimal, and it really doesn't matter. But finally, they tell you that miscalculation is going to lead to war. But recognize, miscalculation in a nuclear war is very different from miscalculation in a conventional war. And that's because when you have nuclear weapons, you're not just going to launch a missile at someone, right? But miscalculation in a conventional war, which is what their evidence stems from, is like you go and shoot someone with a gun. It's very different. All of their empirical examples they're not applicable in this scenario. Okay? Ready for cross?
So, why does North Korea, or why have they sought nuclear weapons historically?
Because in order for Kim Jong-un to remain powerful and to get same support, 1, of his military, and 2, international non-attacks, he needs to make sure that his weapons so that other countries don't perceive us.
Sure, and they're pretty important to Kim.
Yeah.
Am I right? Okay, so if he is unable to use them, or he appears like he can't use them, right?
I mean,
That would pose a pretty great
appearing
threat.
like he isn't able to use. First of all, our first the overview that we give, our observation in our case says that other countries really don't perceive that to be that big of a deal. But second of all,
I'm sorry, China hates that. They
yeah,
literally
but no,
sanction South Korea.
Yeah, but it's not because they think it undermines North Korea's nuclear deterrent.
Yeah,
They
it undermines China's nuclear
Wait, but
deterrent.
that's not the point. Your argument is that countries get mad because they think, or the perception
Yeah.
of North Korea's regime is weaker because North Korea now has less of a nuclear capability.
But it's not limited to North Korea. China also,
That's your
there's
argument.
plenty of evidence suggesting that China
Wait,
already
hold on,
also
hold on.
fears that their deterrent will be removed because of missile defense.
Wait, but your impact comes from North Korea perceiving that
Sure.
they have less of a nuclear
Yeah,
deterrent.
because we think that a war is more likely to break out in between North Korea and South Korea than China. I'm just telling you that there have been regional and global implications
Sure.
of missile defense.
I mean,
But
I'm
your question?
not. Wait, you're really modeling this. Like, I'm not saying that missile defense isn't a controversial issue. I'm just saying that the majority of countries and like with Korea agree that this anti-missile system isn't going to completely undermine North Korea's nuclear capabilities,
Yeah,
right?
sure. But here's the thing. We've already established that these are the most important things to Kim's survival. That is huge. We must understand the implications of that. Even if Kim thinks that there's a 1% chance that his missiles won't get through, of course he's going to build up. Because if I told you that the thing that was key to your survival might be gone, even if it's a low chance, you would take any action, especially if your regime has been under threat of invasion by the US for 70 years.
Sure. Yeah, my problem is, first of all, like in the status quo, he already has missiles that like even without this buildup, he has missiles or like weapons that can go through and hit South Korea without being intercepted by that, right? Like artillery. Like it doesn't really but second of all, if you don't have capabilities.
Well, we say that everyone's always thought that North Korea's not going to have enough money, but they've always proved the contrary. I mean, this guy literally let 2 million of his citizens die in the 90s. This is not the kind of guy
But
who's going to
avenge-
give up. No, everyone, here's the thing, you talked about experts. Experts have a consensus that says that North Korea regime is never going to collapse. We spent a lot of time on this. Do you have a question?
Sure. Okay. So let's talk about your responses to my case. So you tell me that North Korea doesn't like that, right?
The base, yeah.
Yeah, when was that from?
I'm not entirely sure.
That was from the election, right? What our evidence tells you is that for conservatives now, the opinion has switched from that, and
Why?
that's because North Korea's aggression.
Okay, sure. So can you tell me definitively that with missile defense systems, these policies will be passed? Can you show me evidence saying that?
And we just say it was a higher probability.
But, I mean, it's been here for a year. Nothing's happened.
Can you give me 100% probability that we're going to lead to war if we input a mid?
I can say it's certainly a higher possibility. Osno says it's most likely in 60 years.
I
but
mean,
we'll
we'll contend that.
yeah.
I'm gonna take some breath.
Hey, is my phone still recording? Cool. It's gonna run out of space halfway through. I don't know. But like, the first thing I think it can share. And that's all it is about
most important issue in this round is avoiding war because the Atlantic tells you that it will result in over 1 million deaths and it'll decimate the mental health of everyone so turn that against them. Ultimately, the best way to look at avoiding war in the first place is to de-escalate the conflict by solving the root cause of North Korean aggression. Mozarov tells you that bringing into the North Korean military doctrine is to first you have to deter an aggressor. The deterrence here is coming from the nuclear capabilities and the aggressor is coming from the U.S. putting missile systems in the area. But when you introduce missile systems, you nullify their deterrence capabilities. So what they do now is that they look strong and they have to make more deterrence capabilities. In response, they have to show they're still a viable threat to the U.S. They give you a few responses. First, they tell you that war won't happen. Group all of these because when they're provoked by a aggressor, they have to in order to do so. And due to miscalc, when you have bigger and better bonds, what happens is more likely chance of war breaking out. That's what Goldman tells you. Ultimately, they give you a few responses. First, they tell you that missile defense doesn't work, but then they can use artillery anyway. Although this is nullifying the effect of what they've been pouring money into for for a few years. What this means is that they're going to have to use these. And then they try to use it non-unique by saying that they're always going to try to look strong. But they can look strong. They can look strong with their nuclear capabilities. There's a simple cap on what they need in order to deter the U.S. Once they reach that cap, they don't have to start spending more and more and more. Ultimately, what McCohen tells you is that now, in a world with missile defense, what you've seen is an unprecedented number of tests because they want to challenge and threaten the U.S. Ultimately, what will happen is they're going to use missile defense systems to circumvent all these things. They give you first responses. First, they tell you that they already have the tech they can circumvent in response to missile. This is already in response to missile defense. They've circumvented the tech because they've responded, and it's starting a nuclear arms race. Then they tell you an arms race is not unique because of China. Although North Korea is not responding to Chinese militarization, they're responding to U.S. expansionism in the region. So there won't be an arms race with North Korea in it. Then they tell you that there's a few responses North Korea is bankrupt. We have a card Mitchell tells you that North Korea has to prioritize their first defenses. They have to deter an aggressor. That they will prioritize that over every other thing. In fact, history has shown this because they let their people starve, overpouring money into their bank. We have history on our side, and miscalc happens because of Goldman.
Not even long. They're not enough lost this time.
Defense and offense. Everybody ready? Awesome. Start on this idea of a nuclear weapon. They essentially tell you if we deploy THAAD, North Korea gets really nervous, which is why it keeps nuclearizing and starts an arms race. A couple of problems here they've never responded to. The first is, according to the Washington Times, North Korea already has the capability to get around that, and it knows it. At that point, there's no reason for them to start militarizing in the first place, because that isn't actually taking away their deterrent. They never respond to that. They lose their entire case right there. But second, keep in mind, King tells you that even if they militarize, they're never going to attack, because no matter how high the risk of miscalculation goes up, the impact of having the U.S. get involved is always bad, because it always ends in Kim Jong-un's death. He's not willing to risk that. War is never going to happen. But finally, on this idea of an arms race, their impact, keep in mind, Danica tells you in rebuttal that North Korea is always going to nuclearize because they always want to stay ahead of the game, which means this idea of an arms race is completely non-unique. They never respond to that either. At that point, they have no offense in today's round. Let's talk about our case. On this idea of a sense of safety, what we tell you is that in the status quo, even though countries recognize that that is incorrect, we've been seeing a lot of blown up statements about it, which lead 80% of South Koreans in the last 2 weeks to think that that is necessary for their safety in response to North Korean hydrogen bombs. They tell you that liberals hate it, and it's not about apples and oranges. They're misunderstanding our point. We're not saying that that is necessary to bring all of these parties together. What we're telling you is that these parties might come together anyway. The only guarantee is that if Moon loses 80% of popularity, or even a significant amount of popularity, due to the fact that he just alienated all of South Korea because they think they're unsafe, that's when they're going to stop working with him, according to Kim. That's really important, because he only has a 40% majority right now. So if other people aren't willing to work with him for the fear that he's going to get contaminated, Parliament doesn't pass any of his policies. First, on this idea of the economy, his economic policies. They tell you that we passed it in the past First of all, that was only the first part of the economic policy. He still has more he wants to keep going. But second of all, the reason we could pass it in the past is because there wasn't 80% of South Korea supporting THAAD then. There was only like 50%, so politicians could still work with him. Now they're not willing to alienate that huge voter base. But second, on this idea of the environment, keep in mind that 200,000 South Koreans die each decade from environmental pollution, largely due to these 10 coal plants that are so outdated that they're releasing dangerous particulate matter everywhere. Moon wants to stop that, but he needs parliamentary approval, and he can only do that in a world where we deploy that. You guys ready for Grand Cross?
Yep.
Awesome. You ready? Okay. Fair enough. You guys get first question.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about this political capital argument. So y'all contend that with missile defense systems, or with the political capital gained from defense systems, Moon will be able to pass policy, including, most importantly, these plants, both end plants, reducing air pollution.
Yeah.
Is there any suggestion that this is happening? I mean, you say it could happen, right?
Yeah, so 5 days after he was elected, Moon was able to pass this policy temporarily halting those 10 coal plants. But
That was before he agreed to deploy THAAD, right? Like,
Yes.
when he got in office, he was
Guys,
very anti-THAAD.
guys, you're misunderstanding our
And
point.
it's not about deploying that or not deploying that. It's about going with popular support. So after the election, Moon was running on an anti-THAAD platform, and then the populace didn't support that. Now, in the
It
last
shifted
2
towards
weeks,
that.
because of North Korea's the aggressive missile launch,
It's really,
Sure.
it's
So why
really,
haven't we,
really
in the
easy
past
to
2 weeks,
understand.
why haven't we seen any murmurs or any whispers of political policy?
What
Because
has
y'all
been passed
don't
in
read
the
a
last 2
single
weeks?
card from the last 2 weeks
Guys,
claiming that there's been any movement
So
on that.
here's
Yeah.
the logical,
I
I
mean,
can't
let-
give you a
politics-
policy
Pass the
that
policy
hasn't
in
passed in 2
2
weeks.
No, but all I'm asking for is murmurs and whisper, right?
Guys.
Like, politics can move fast. Is there
Guys.
any suggestion that the policies might be passed? Any?
So all I'm telling you is that what in the status quo, the new development that you guys can't address is that now 80% of South Koreans want that. And I cannot give you a single policy that's been passed in the last 2 weeks because that's not how policies pass, they happen over time. But what I can tell you is that Moon only controls 40% of parliament, and that 40% is kind of tenuous if he looks like he's about to fall. That's why the only way that any of his policies have a chance of passing is if he doesn't look like he's a dangerous star to attach yourself to. Politicians are inherently, they want to be reelected, they want to please
Yeah, so
voters.
it needs 60%, right?
Yes.
What you tell us is that what you don't tell us and what you don't respond to is that how he gets from the 40 to the 60. You don't
Cooperation.
What?
Cooperation.
Yeah, but you don't read any evidence for that, right? You just say, oh, people are going to be a little more likely to cooperate.
Right.
So they're
It's-
not going to
guys.
cross party lines in order
Guys.
to do these policies, right?
Guys, in the past, you tell me that part of the economic policy was passed. I tell you that the coal plants were temporarily hard. Clearly, he's able to get the 60% for some policies when he needs to.
But isn't it
The
curious
problem-
that the
guys,
most significant
can I
policy
finish?
passed, the stimulus, was passed while THAAD was halted?
No, because at that point, 80% of South Koreans weren't for THAAD. That's a new development in the last 2
I mean,
weeks.
50,
That's the
80%,
right
that's still a
line.
majority,
Portion
like,
were,
still-
guys.
Right? It's still a significant portion that they were.
I mean, sure, but
At the time.
50% means that there's like a high percentage the other way. 80% means that it is very clear that if a politician sides.
50% is pretty
Guys,
good, right? That's
and
half of
you're
his
gonna make
voter
policy
base.
with an 80% approval rate?
If you lose 50% of your
Like, what
voter
policy has
base,
8%
Guys,
approval?
that's very, very significant from politicians, right? 50%?
No.
Going from 50 to 80%.
That means it's still a bipartisan issue at least, which means that people can like disagree on it or agree on it. What's happening right now is that politicians are not willing to alienate 80% of the voter base. That
They
means
have.
like they just lost re-election right there.
They haven't passed.
When have people alienated 80% of voters, or
Well,
what's
it's
the
not like
policy that would
Hillary,
do
but
that?
when you've seen like the halt, when we stopped the deployment and then when we deployed.
But that was
again.
before South Koreans got really scared. The 80% is in the last 2 weeks. That's new. These other policies don't affect it. That like empirical argument doesn't matter.
Okay. We will run 30 seconds. Alright. Just for clarity, I'm going to start on political capital and then go to archives. Judges ready? The most important issue in this round is preventing conflict outbreak. My opponents claim that maybe reducing air pollution is somewhat important. Let's evaluate that, right? Even if we take them at their best, and this is the most important impact, they don't get any offense off of it. My opponents claim that he will be able to muster this coalition and pass bills. Yet, we have not heard a single murmur or whisper of this happening. That has been deployed for a little while, right? Yet they can't give you a single iota of evidence suggesting that any major policy has been passed. In fact, Reuters explains that the biggest policy that was passed, the stimulus, was passed when THAAD was halted. That's no coincidence, right? It shows that even that regardless of whether he supports THAAD or is against THAAD, he will pass policy because he can form coalitions. Their argument simply is not realistic in the real world. It's very hypothetical. Maybe this happens, maybe it doesn't. It's super speculative. I asked them in Grand Crossfire if they have any evidence showing that even politicians might be more inclined to support his policy. They can't give me any. All they claim, first they say that like we're going to decrease pollution, and then they say like if we have the coalition, we may be able to do this. But make them show you that this is actually going to happen. In terms of likelihood, I would say they have 0% chance of this happening because we've not seen any evidence suggesting this is so. Apples and oranges. Here's what really is important. War. Not good for anything. If there is a war on the Korean Peninsula, the Atlantic says 1 million people will die. That's a much greater impact on magnitude and on time frame because this lasts a lot longer than air pollution. Here's why war is more likely to happen in a world with missile systems. Remember, Mazarov says that the most important thing to him are his nuclear deterrents, right? The single most important thing. This guy has lived under the threat of invasion for 60 years. His only guaranteed survival, his only, is nuclear weapons. Yet, missile defense, according to SIOE, takes away those deterrents. So as a result, he is forced to accelerate, one, his testing, and two, build new weapons. They respond by saying that he already has them. Yeah, he has them now because he has built new weapons that are more advanced. The problem with that is that it sparks an arms race. Reuters explains that in reaction, South Korea is now militarizing, building more nuclear-powered subs, and building more missiles. That ramps up the conflict, so miscalculation becomes far more likely. Goldman explains that when these tensions are so high and both parties are armed to the teeth, when there's a hair-trigger moment that one provocation demands an immediate response, the chance of war spikes. And Osnos explains that we are the closest to war that we've ever been. In terms of likelihood, I would vote for the fact that even if war is a 5% chance, that's much greater than the 0% chance that some people maybe survive by this. I would say that most people dying in South Korea has a far greater impact and far more likely, and that's why we need it.
Running the rest of our prep time starting now.
They're losing their own case about war consuming. This is for a couple of reasons. First of all, the Washington Times evidence, which they really misconstrued, that tells you that North Korea already has weapons and has been building up weapons that can get through anti-missile defense for a really long time. At that point, their nuclear deterrent is really not harmed because they have weapons that can get through this anyways. It really doesn't matter. But second of all, because the Kang evidence, which they never respond to, tells you that no matter what, North Korea will literally never launch an attack. And that's because launching an attack means Kim Jong-un's regime is completely collapsed. At that point, a North Korean attack is so unlikely they never respond to this. The war is 0%, but the probability of domestic policies benefiting South Korean interests at least is greater than 0. And we tell you that in the status quo, and as of 2 weeks ago, there is an 80% approval rate for THAAD in South Korea, and that is because of North Korea's increased aggression. They give you a couple of responses. First of all, they tell you that they passed a bill when THAAD was halted, but recognize the 80% approval rate of THAAD happened far after that. It only happened 2 weeks ago in response to big North Korean aggression. But then they say that we haven't proved any policies that have been passed in the past 2 weeks. Obviously, it's been 2 weeks. How can you see policies passed within 2 weeks? It really doesn't make sense. But the clear way to vote for us and the clearest impact to South Korean interests is going to be this stimulus package because of the Jung evidence, who tells you that if Moon is able to pass it, he can create 810,000 jobs. However, the Kim evidence that we read you at the top of our case tells you that because if he doesn't have enough power in Congress, because he doesn't have enough seats, he only has 40% of the Congress seats. President Moon will not be able to enact any policies. At that point, you're going to be weighing this because it at least has some probability of giving 810,000 jobs to South Koreans, the clearly into South Korean interests.
Can I see a couple pieces of evidence? From the Khan, can I see the Maserati? From you all, can I see the Washington Times?
Yes.
And could I see 80% approval rating for that?